Norah Hayes clutched her tray of empty glasses tighter, as the unwelcome sound of heavy boots followed her down the dusty street of Fort Bowie, Arizona. The year was 1883, and the small frontier town, once just a military outpost, had grown into a rough settlement where the law existed mostly in theory rather than practice, especially after dark. "Where you rushing off to, pretty lady?" called a gravelly voice behind her. "Night's just starting." Norah didn't turn around. The three men had been watching her all evening at the Copper Canyon Saloon where she worked serving drinks. Their eyes had followed her every move, growing hungrier with each whiskey they downed. When her shift ended at midnight, they tossed coins on the table and followed her out the swinging doors. "I said, where you going?" The voice was closer now, slurred but menacing. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The boarding house where she rented a small room was still 4 blocks away, and the streets were nearly empty at this hour. Fort Bowie wasn't like the bigger settlements no marshal patrolled after dark, and the army officers stationed at the nearby fort rarely ventured into town this late. "Don't be unfriendly now." A different voice, smoother but somehow more frightening. "We just want to escort a lady home." Rough laughter followed this comment, making it clear their intentions were far from gentlemanly. Norah finally risked a glance over her shoulder. The three men were closer than she'd feared, barely 20 feet behind her. She recognized them as cattle drivers who'd ridden in with a herd 2 days ago. The tallest one, with a jagged scar splitting his left eyebrow, grinned when their eyes met. "There you go, darlin'. Knew you'd warm up to us." She turned forward and walked faster, nearly running now. Her worn boots scraped against the packed dirt of the street. The boarding house seemed impossibly far away. The sound of the men's footsteps quickened too. Panic rose in her throat as she realized they would catch her before she reached safety. Norah clutched her tray tighter, wondering if she could use it as a weapon. Her father had always said she had a fighter's spirit, but against 3 grown men. A figure stepped out from between 2 buildings ahead, silhouetted against the dim light of a distant lantern. For a terrible moment, Norah thought it was another threat, until she recognized the tall, broad-shouldered outline of a man she'd seen occasionally at the saloon. He wore a cattleman's hat pulled low over his eyes, and his stance was casual yet somehow alert. The footsteps behind her faltered slightly as the men noticed the newcomer. "Evening, madam," the stranger said, tipping his hat to Norah before shifting his attention to the men behind her. His voice carried the soft drawl of Texas, but there was nothing soft about the steel in his tone as he continued. "Think you fellows might be headed in the wrong direction." "Mind your business, cowboy," growled the scarred man. "The lady and us were just getting acquainted." Norah reached the stranger's side, breathing hard. Up close, she could see his face more clearly in the dim light. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 30, with a weathered face and eyes that held a quiet intensity. He moved slightly, positioning himself between Norah and her pursuers. "Not tonight," he said simply. His hand rested casually near the holstered revolver at his hip. The 3 men spread out slightly, their drunken bravado wavering as they assessed the situation. "3 against 1, mister," said the shortest of the 3, a stocky man with a matted beard. "Those ain't odds I'd bet on." The stranger didn't flinch. "Then it's good I'm not asking you to place any bets." He shifted his stance slightly. "The lady's done working for the night. Whatever you're looking for, you won't find it here." The tense standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Norah held her breath, keenly aware that this confrontation could explode into violence at any moment. Finally, the scarred man spat in the dirt. "Come on, boys. Too many willing women in this town to waste time on one that ain't." He glared at the stranger. "You'd best watch your back, cowboy." "I always do," came the even reply. The three men retreated, muttering threats and obscenities as they stumbled back toward the Saloon district. Only when they disappeared around a corner did Norah release the breath she'd been holding. "Thank you," she said, her voice shakier than she would have liked. "I don't know what would have happened if—" "No need to think about that," the stranger interrupted gently. "Where are you headed, madam? I'll see you there safely." "The Widow Miller's boarding house. It's just—" "I know it." "Good place." He gestured for her to lead the way. "Gabriel Harrington," he offered. "Most folks call me Gabe. Norah Hayes." She studied him as they walked, still wary despite his intervention. In Fort Bowie, kindness often came with conditions. "I've seen you at the saloon. You don't drink much." A slight smile crossed his face. "No, madam, I don't. Found out early that whiskey and I don't get along too well." His eyes scanned the street ahead, remaining vigilant. "Been in town about 3 weeks. Working with the Henderson outfit moving cattle." Norah nodded. That explained why she'd only noticed him recently. "You're not like most of the cowboys that come through." "I'll take that as a compliment," he said, though I suspect it wasn't entirely meant as one. Despite everything, Norah found herself smiling. "Let's say I've learned to be cautious." They reached the boarding house, a 2-story wooden structure with a small porch and neatly curtained windows. Most rooms were dark at this hour, though a lamp still burned in the downstairs parlor where Mrs. Miller often sat up late with her knitting. "This is me," Norah said, pausing at the steps. "Thank you again, Mr. Harrington." "Gabe," he corrected. "And you're welcome, Miss Hayes." He tipped his hat again. "Will you be walking home the same time tomorrow night?" Norah hesitated, unsure of his intentions. As if reading her thoughts, he quickly added, "Only asking because those men might still be in town. I'd be happy to meet you after your shift, just to make sure you get home safe." Norah considered his offer. While she prided herself on independence, she wasn't foolish. The men had seemed genuinely threatening, and Fort Bowie was becoming increasingly dangerous as more cattle outfits moved through the territory. "I finish at midnight," she said finally. Gabe nodded. "I'll be outside the saloon at midnight then." He stepped back from the porch. "Sleep well, Miss Hayes." "Norah," she corrected, surprising herself. A genuine smile crossed his face, transforming his serious features. "Good night, Norah." She watched him walk away, his figure gradually disappearing into the darkness. Only when he was gone did she realize she was still clutching her serving tray from the saloon in a white-knuckled grip. Shaking her head at her own tension, Norah turned and entered the boarding house, looking forward to the safety of her small room more than usual tonight. Inside, she nodded a greeting to Mrs. Miller, who looked up from her knitting with raised eyebrows. "Late tonight, dear," the older woman observed. "Everything all right?" "Yes, madam," Norah replied, not wanting to worry her landlady with tales of threatening cowboys. "Just a busy night at the saloon." Mrs. Miller's gaze was shrewd. "And who was that young man who walked you home? Not one of your usual admirers?" Norah felt her cheeks warm. "Just a customer being gentlemanly, Mrs. Miller. Nothing to gossip about." The widow's eyes twinkled. "If you say so, dear. Though I haven't seen a gentleman like that around Fort Bowie in quite some time. Seemed to have good manners." "Good night, Mrs. Miller," Norah said firmly, heading for the stairs. "Good night, dear. Sweet dreams." In her small room on the second floor, Norah set down the tray and began her nightly routine. As she unpinned her honey-brown hair and brushed out the long waves, her mind returned to the evening's events. The threat of those men still made her shiver, but Gabriel Harrington's timely appearance had been unexpected. Fort Bowie had taught Norah harsh lessons about trusting strangers, especially men. Since arriving 2 years ago after her father's death, she'd learned to keep her guard up and rely on herself. Working at the saloon wasn't her first choice, but it paid better than most jobs available to women in the territory, and she was saving every penny she could toward her dream of opening a small dress shop someday. Men like those drunken cowboys were common enough, treating women working in saloons as if they were available for more than just serving drinks. What was uncommon was someone like Gabe stepping in without expecting something in return. As she climbed into bed, Norah wondered if she'd been hasty in accepting his offer to escort her home tomorrow night. Yet there had been something in his eyes, a steadiness, a quiet strength that had felt trustworthy in a way she couldn't quite explain. Sleep came slowly as her mind replayed the confrontation on the street. The last thought before she drifted off was of Gabe Harrington's voice, calm and unyielding. "Not tonight." Morning arrived with the usual sounds of Fort Bowie coming to life, wagons creaking past the boarding house, distant shouts from the military post, Mrs. Miller clattering around in the kitchen downstairs. Norah rose early despite her late night, knowing she had errands to run before her shift at the saloon. After washing up and pinning her hair into a simple bun at the nape of her neck, she dressed in her everyday blue calico dress and headed downstairs for breakfast. "There you are, Mrs. Miller said, bustling about the kitchen. "Thought you might sleep late after coming in at such an hour." "Too much to do," Norah replied, accepting a cup of strong coffee gratefully. "I need to visit the mercantile and post a letter to my aunt in Denver." Mrs. Miller slid a plate of biscuits and bacon in front of her. "That Henderson outfit's still in town, I heard. Selling their herd to the army. Means the saloon will be busy again tonight." Norah nodded, wondering if Mrs. Miller somehow knew about her trouble the previous night. The widow had an uncanny way of knowing everything that happened in Fort Bowie, though Norah was certain she hadn't mentioned the confrontation. "Yes, I expect it will be," she said neutrally. "Young man who walked you home, he with the Henderson outfit." Norah nearly choked on her coffee. "Mrs. Miller, are you interrogating me?" The older woman laughed. "Just making conversation, dear. A woman my age has to find entertainment where she can." "Well, yes, he mentioned he works for Henderson." Norah took a bite of biscuit to avoid further questions. Mrs. Miller smiled knowingly but mercifully, changed the subject to the latest letter she'd received from her son in San Francisco. After breakfast, Norah set out for her errands. Fort Bowie in daylight was a stark contrast to the threatening darkness of the previous night. The town wasn't large, really just a main street with offshoots of smaller lanes, but it bustled with activity. The military fort, for which the town was named, sat on a hill about a mile away, its flags visible from the main street. At the mercantile, Norah purchased thread and needles, planning to mend some of her work dresses. She was examining a bolt of blue cotton fabric she couldn't afford when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Morning, Miss Hayes." She turned to find Gabe Harrington standing there, hat in hand. In daylight, she could see him more clearly than she had the night before. He was tall and broad-shouldered, as she'd noted, with sandy brown hair cut short and a clean-shaven face that spoke of recent attention. His clothes were typical cowboy attire: denim trousers, check shirt, leather vest, but noticeably cleaner than most of the trail hands who passed through town. "Mr. Harrington," she acknowledged with a nod. "Or Gabe, was it?" He smiled. "That's right." He gestured to the fabric she'd been admiring. "That's a nice color, would suit you." Norah felt her cheeks warm slightly at the compliment. "Perhaps someday. Right now it's a luxury I don't need." He nodded, seeming to understand the practical mindset of someone who had to work for everything they had. "Just wanted to make sure you were all right after last night." "I am, thank you." She studied him curiously. "Do you always come to the rescue of women you don't know?" A shadow crossed his face. When I can. He shifted the subject. I'm still happy to meet you after your shift tonight if you'd like. Norah considered declining. In daylight, last night's fears seemed more distant, and she prided herself on self-reliance. But the memory of those men's voices, the intent in their eyes, was still too fresh. I would appreciate that, she admitted, though I hope it won't keep you from your own plans. No plans to speak of, he hesitated. Truth is, I don't much care for how some of the outfit behave in town. Prefer to keep to myself most evenings. The storekeeper approached, eyeing Gabe with thinly veiled suspicion. Can I help you folks with something? Just saying hello to Miss Hayes, Gabe replied easily. I'll let you get back to your shopping, he nodded to Norah. See you this evening, then. She watched him leave, noting how he replaced his hat only after exiting the store, a small gesture of politeness that stood out in a town where manners were often considered superfluous. Know him well, do you? The storekeeper asked, still watching the door. Not really, Mr. Perkins. He's just an acquaintance, Perkins harumphed. Well, you be careful. Cowboy's a cowboy, no matter how polite he seems. Norah bit back a retort about how the storekeeper's own son was known for harassing young women after church socials. Instead, she simply paid for her purchases and left. The rest of the day passed quickly. Norah visited the post office, then returned to her room to sew until it was time for her shift at the Copper Canyon. As she pinned up her hair more elaborately for work and changed into one of her serviceable but more flattering dresses, she found herself thinking about Gabe Harrington more than she should. There was something different about him, a quietness that didn't seem born of weakness, but rather of some inner strength. She'd met plenty of men who were all bluster and swagger, especially in her line of work. Gabe seemed to be the opposite, a man comfortable enough with himself that he didn't need to prove anything. It was an attractive quality, she had to admit. But Norah had learned the hard way not to be swayed by first impressions. Men could be charming when they wanted something. The Copper Canyon was already bustling when she arrived for her shift. The owner, a heavy-set man named Frank Mosley, was behind the bar serving drinks with his usual efficient but unfriendly manner. You're late, Hayes, he grunted as she tied an apron around her waist. Norah glanced at the clock on the wall. By 2 minutes, Mr. Mosley, he shrugged, unimpressed. Tables 3 and 5 need service. And watch that cowboy crowd in the corner. They're already 3 sheets to the wind, and it's not even sundown. She followed his gaze to a table in the far corner where several men in trail dust were playing cards and drinking heavily. With a sinking feeling, she recognized the scarred man and his companions from the previous night. They hadn't noticed her yet, absorbed as they were in their game. Steeling herself, Norah went about her work, serving drinks and dodging wandering hands with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing it for 2 years. She managed to avoid the corner table for the first hour of her shift, but eventually, Mosley sent her over with a fresh bottle of whiskey. The scarred man looked up as she approached, recognition dawning slowly in his alcohol-glazed eyes. Well, look who it is, boys. Our friendly little lady from last night. Norah set the bottle down without comment, trying to retreat, but the man grabbed her wrist. Don't run off so quick. We got interrupted last night before we could get properly acquainted. His fingers dug into her skin. Name's Brock. These here are my boys, Lester and Emmett. Please let go of my arm, sir, Norah said, keeping her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. I have other tables to serve. Now, that ain't friendly, Brock said, tightening his grip. Especially after we paid good money for this whiskey in your fine establishment. The other men at the table chuckled, watching with amusement. Norah glanced around for help, but Mosley was occupied at the bar, and the saloon was crowded enough that no one was paying attention to her predicament. Your cowboy friend ain't here to help you now, Brock continued, his voice lower and more threatening. But don't you worry. We'll be waiting again tonight, and this time we'll make sure no one interrupts. Norah tried to pull away, panic rising. Let go or I'll scream, Brock laughed. Go ahead. Folk'll just think it's another saloon girl playing hard to get. A shadow fell across the table. The lady asked you to let go. Norah looked up in surprise to see Gabriel Harrington standing there, his expression composed but his eyes hard as flint. He wasn't wearing a gun belt. The Copper Canyon had a policy against firearms inside, but his stance suggested he didn't need one. Brock's grip on Norah's wrist tightened reflexively before he released her with a sneer. Well, if it ain't the White Knight. Didn't expect to see you in here, Harrington. Heard you were too good for saloon entertainments. Miss Hayes, Gabe said, not taking his eyes off Brock. I believe Mr. Mosley is looking for you at the bar. Grateful for the excuse, Norah stepped away from the table. Thank you, she murmured as she passed Gabe. This ain't over, Brock called after her. Not by a long shot. From the bar, Norah watched anxiously as Gabe remained at the table for a moment longer, saying something too quiet for her to hear. Whatever it was, it wiped the smirk from Brock's face. The scarred man's hand moved toward his boot, where Norah suspected he kept a knife, but one of his companions grabbed his arm, shaking his head in warning. Gabe turned and walked away, crossing to the bar where Norah stood with Mosley, who was watching the scene with narrow eyes. Don't need trouble in my establishment, Harrington, the owner said gruffly. No trouble from me, Frank, Gabe replied evenly. Just a friendly conversation. Mosley grunted, unconvinced. You drinking tonight or just socializing? Coffee if you have it. Been a long day. The owner nodded to Norah. Get him coffee, Hayes. Then table 2 needs clearing. As Mosley moved away to serve another customer, Norah quickly poured coffee into a mug. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly, sliding the mug toward Gabe. I know. His eyes met hers, but I wanted to. What did you say to him? To Brock. A shadow of a smile touched Gabe's lips. Just reminded him that the army doesn't take kindly to cattle hands who cause trouble in town, and that Captain Reynolds and I served together during the Apache campaigns. Norah's eyebrows rose. You were in the army. Cavalry, 6 years. He sipped his coffee. Got out 2 years ago, didn't much care for taking orders anymore. She studied him with new interest. That explained the straight posture, the disciplined air about him. So now you take orders from trail bosses instead. Different kind of orders, he said with a slight shrug. And not for much longer. This is my last drive with Henderson. Got plans of my own. Before Norah could inquire further, Mosley called sharply from the other end of the bar. Hayes, table 2, I'm not paying you to chat. I'd better go, she said apologetically. Will you still? I'll be here when your shift ends, Gabe assured her. Go on. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of activity. The saloon grew more crowded as night fell, and Norah barely had time to breathe between serving drinks and clearing tables. She was keenly aware of Brock and his friends watching her from their corner, their expressions growing more malevolent as they continued drinking. But she was equally aware of Gabe's presence, usually at the bar or at a small table near the front door, nursing the same coffee for hours while he observed the room with quiet vigilance. By the time midnight approached, the saloon had thinned out somewhat. Brock and his companions had finally left about an hour earlier, stumbling drunkenly into the night with hateful glances toward both Norah and Gabe. Norah felt a wave of relief as she untied her apron and collected her meager tips. Gabe was waiting by the door, hat in hand. Ready? He asked simply. Mosley, counting the night's earnings behind the bar, looked up with a frown. Getting mighty friendly with my waitress, Harrington. Just seeing Miss Hayes safely home, Gabe replied. "Unless you'd prefer to escort her yourself," the saloon owner snorted. "Do what you want. Just have her back here on time tomorrow." He waved a dismissive hand. "Go on, Hayes. Get some rest." Outside, the night air was cool and refreshing after hours in the smoky saloon. Norah took a deep breath, feeling some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Thank you for waiting," she said as they began walking toward the boarding house. "It's been a long night." Gabe nodded, his eyes scanning the darkened street ahead of them. "Those men Brock and his friends, they left a while ago, but better safe than sorry." "Have you known them long?" "They seem to know you." "Know of me," Gabe corrected. "Brock Miller's got a reputation in these parts. Mean drunk, meaner sober. Been in and out of jails from here to Santa Fe." He glanced at her. "You should be careful around him. He doesn't take kindly to being shown up, especially in front of his men." Norah shivered slightly, drawing her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I don't plan on being anywhere near him if I can help it." They walked in companionable silence for a while, their footsteps echoing on the packed dirt of the street. Fort Bowie was quiet at this hour, most establishments closed except for the saloons. "You mentioned you had plans," Norah said finally, curiosity getting the better of her. "After your last drive with Henderson." Gabe seemed to consider how much to share. "Got my eye on a piece of land northeast of here near the foothills. Good water, decent grazing, been saving up." "Your own ranch?" Norah couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "Most cowboys she'd met lived day to day, spending their pay as soon as they earned it," he nodded. "Small to start, but a man gets tired of sleeping under the stars and eating trail dust." He glanced at her. "What about you? Planning to serve drinks at the Copper Canyon forever?" The question might have seemed impertinent from someone else, but there was no judgment in his tone, only genuine interest. "No," Norah said firmly. "I'm saving too. For a dress shop eventually. I used to help my aunt with her seamstress business in Denver before." She trailed off, not wanting to delve into the circumstances that had brought her to Fort Bowie. "Before," Gabe prompted gently. Norah sighed. "Before my father died. He was a mining engineer, thought he'd found a promising silver deposit near here, put everything we had into the claim." Her voice tightened. "It played out after 6 months, not enough silver to fill a thimble," the assayer said. "Pa took sick that winter, pneumonia, didn't make it to spring." "I'm sorry," Gabe said, and she could tell he meant it. "That's a hard way to lose someone." She nodded, surprised at herself for sharing so much. She rarely spoke about her father's death or the circumstances that had left her alone in a frontier town with few options for respectable employment. "Anyway," she continued, deliberately lightening her tone, "the Copper Canyon isn't forever. It pays better than laundry or cooking, and I've almost saved enough for a sewing machine. Once I have that, I can take in mending and dressmaking on the side." They had reached the boarding house, its darkened windows suggesting most residents were already asleep. Only Mrs. Miller's parlor light still glowed dimly through the curtains. "Thank you again for walking me home," Norah said, pausing at the bottom of the porch steps. "My pleasure." Gabe hesitated, then asked, "Would it be too forward to ask if I might call on you properly sometime? Maybe Sunday after church?" The question caught Norah off guard. She'd assumed his assistance was simply gentlemanly behavior, not an indication of personal interest. She studied his face in the faint light from the parlor windows, searching for signs of insincerity. "I'd like that," she found herself saying, surprising herself again. "I attend services at 9. The smile that spread across his face transformed his serious features. "I'll be there." He stepped back, replacing his hat. "Good night, Norah." "Good night, Gabe." As she climbed the steps to the boarding house door, Norah realized she was smiling too. Mrs. Miller looked up from her knitting as Norah entered, a knowing expression on her lined face. "That's twice now," the widow observed mildly. "People will talk." "Let them," Norah replied with uncharacteristic defiance. "He's a gentleman." Mrs. Miller's eyes twinkled. "Never said he wasn't, dear. In fact, I think it's high time you met someone worth smiling about." Norah shook her head, but couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her at the older woman's words. "Good night, Mrs. Miller. Sweet dreams, dear." In her room, as she prepared for bed, Norah found herself humming softly something she hadn't done in a long time. The troubles with Brock and his companions still concerned her, but somehow, the prospect of seeing Gabriel Harrington at church on Sunday made those worries seem more manageable. Sunday seemed impossibly distant on Wednesday night, but the following days passed in a blur of activity. Norah continued her shifts at the Copper Canyon, relieved to find no sign of Brock and his friends. Gabe still appeared each night to escort her home, their walks growing longer as they discovered more to talk about. She learned that he'd grown up on a small farm in Texas, joined the cavalry at 18 after his parents died in a flood, and spent 6 years patrolling the southwestern territories during the height of the Apache conflicts. He was 31, had never been married, and possessed a quiet wisdom that spoke of experiences beyond his years. In turn, Norah shared more of her own history, her childhood in Denver with her widowed father, their move to Arizona Territory when she was 19, full of dreams that had crumbled with his failed mining venture. She spoke of her determination to make her own way, to eventually leave saloon work behind and build something that was truly hers. Each night, their farewell at the boarding house steps grew more reluctant, lingering a few minutes longer than the night before. Mrs. Miller, who inevitably waited up in the parlor, watched their developing friendship with approving eyes, though she refrained from further teasing after that first night. By Sunday morning, Norah found herself unusually particular about her appearance as she dressed for church. She wore her best dress, a navy blue cotton with delicate white piping that she'd sewn herself, and spent extra time arranging her honey-brown hair beneath her modest hat. "My goodness," Mrs. Miller commented as Norah descended the stairs. "If I didn't know better, I'd think you were trying to impress someone today." Norah felt her cheeks warm. "It's the Lord's Day, Mrs. Miller. We should look our best." "MMHMM," the widow hummed knowingly. "And the Lord appreciates a pretty blush on a young woman's cheeks, I'm sure." The small whitewashed church on the edge of town was already filling with Fort Bowie's more respectable citizens when Norah and Mrs. Miller arrived. Norah couldn't help scanning the gathered faces, looking for Gabe's familiar features among them. She felt a twinge of disappointment when she didn't see him, but reminded herself that not everyone was as punctual as she and Mrs. Miller tended to be. They took their usual pew near the middle of the church. As more townsfolk filed in, Norah kept glancing toward the door, her attention only half on the choir's opening hymn. Just as the minister stepped up to the pulpit, the door opened one final time, and Gabriel Harrington slipped in quietly. Norah's heart gave a ridiculous little jump at the sight of him. He was dressed more formally than she'd seen before: clean dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd clearly taken extra care with his appearance. He scanned the congregation briefly before spotting Norah, and the smile that crossed his face when their eyes met sent a warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the stuffy church interior. As the only vacant spaces were at the very back, Gabe took a seat in the last pew. Throughout the service, Norah found her attention drifting repeatedly to where he sat, attentive and solemn during the sermon. Once or twice she caught him looking her way, and each time that same warmth flooded through her. When the service ended and the congregation began to file out, Norah felt a flutter of nerves. This was different from their late-night walks or brief conversations at the saloon. This was Gabe calling on her properly, in daylight, in front of the entire town. It felt significant in a way she hadn't fully anticipated. He was waiting outside the church steps, hat in hand, when she emerged with Mrs. Miller. "Miss Hayes," he said, nodding politely before turning to her companion. "Mrs. Miller, isn't it? I don't believe we've been formally introduced." "Gabriel Harrington." The older woman beamed at him. "Pleasure to meet you properly, Mr. Harrington. Norah's mentioned you." "Has she?" Gabe's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners as he glanced at Norah, who felt her cheeks warming again. "All good things, Mrs. Miller assured him with a twinkle in her eye. "Now, I believe Mrs. Perkins wanted my opinion on her quilt pattern. You two young people will have to excuse me." With a conspiratorial smile at Norah, she moved off to join a group of older women gathering near the church steps. "She's subtle," Gabe observed dryly when Mrs. Miller was out of earshot. Norah laughed. "About as subtle as a stampede. She means well, though." "I'm glad you came," he said more seriously. "I wondered if you might change your mind." "Why would I do that?" he shrugged slightly. "Most respectable ladies in town don't associate with cowboys, especially not ones who spend their evenings in saloons." "You're there to escort me home, not to carouse," Norah pointed out. "Besides, I'm hardly the most respectable lady in town myself. I work in that same saloon, remember." "To save for your dress shop," Gabe reminded her. "There's nothing disreputable about hard work or ambition." He offered his arm. "Would you care to walk for a while? It's a fine day." It was indeed a beautiful day, clear blue Arizona sky, a gentle breeze tempering the heat that would build as the day progressed. Norah placed her hand lightly on his offered arm, acutely aware of the sturdy strength beneath her fingertips. "I'd like that," she said. They strolled away from the church, nodding politely to other churchgoers they passed. Norah was conscious of curious glances following them, but found she didn't mind as much as she might have expected. Let them talk if they wanted to. "I ride out with Henderson tomorrow," Gabe said as they walked toward the edge of town. "Taking a herd to the Fort Apache reservation, Army contract." Norah felt a surprising pang of disappointment. "How long will you be gone?" 2 weeks, thereabouts. "It's my last drive with Henderson." He glanced at her. "When I get back, I'll be settling my accounts and heading out to look at that land I mentioned." "Oh," Norah tried to keep her tone neutral. "So you'll be leaving Fort Bowie then?" Gabe stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "That depends," he said seriously. "On what?" His eyes held hers steadily. "On whether I have a reason to come back." Norah's breath caught at the implication in his words. They'd known each other less than a week, yet somehow the connection between them felt substantial in a way she couldn't quite explain. "Gabe," she began, uncertain how to respond, "we've only just met." I know," he interrupted gently. "I'm not asking for promises, Norah, just permission to call on you again when I return, to see where this might lead." Relief mingled with a different kind of tension as she considered his words. "I'd like that," she said finally, surprised by how true it was. "I'd like that very much." The smile that spread across his face was worth any amount of town gossip. "Good," he said simply. "That's good." They resumed walking, the silence between them comfortable now. At the edge of town, they paused to look out at the desert landscape stretching toward distant mountains. "It's beautiful in its own way," Norah observed. "I didn't see it at first when I came here." "Too busy being disappointed, I suppose," Gabe nodded. "Takes time to appreciate, like most things worth knowing." He turned to her, his expression serious again. "I should get you back. I've still got preparations to make before tomorrow." As they walked back toward the boarding house, Norah found herself wishing the day could stretch longer, that tomorrow would never come. It was an unfamiliar feeling, this reluctance to part, and it both thrilled and frightened her. At the boarding house steps, they paused again. Mrs. Miller wasn't home yet, still visiting with her friends after church. "Will you be at the saloon tonight?" Gabe asked. Norah shook her head. "Sunday's my night off. Mosley's niece fills in. Then I won't see you before I leave." He looked genuinely disappointed. "We ride out at dawn." "Be careful," Norah said, surprising herself with the depth of concern in her voice. "The reservation runs have been dangerous lately, from what I hear. I've made the trip before." His hand moved as if to touch her face, then stopped, hovering uncertainly between them. "Norah," whatever he was about to say was interrupted by the approach of a wagon rumbling down the street. The moment broken, Gabe stepped back, his hand falling to his side. "2 weeks," he said instead. "I'll come find you when I return." Norah nodded, suddenly finding it difficult to speak past the lump in her throat. Gabe tipped his hat to her, a gentle smile touching his lips. "Take care of yourself, Norah Hayes, and stay clear of Brock and his boys if they come back to town." "I will," she promised. "Safe journey, Gabriel Harrington." She watched him walk away, his tall figure disappearing around a corner. Only when he was completely out of sight did she turn and enter the boarding house, her thoughts in a tumult of emotions she wasn't quite ready to name. The 2 weeks of Gabe's absence stretched interminably. Norah threw herself into her work at the saloon, taking extra shifts when possible to add to her savings. The routine helped distract her from thoughts of Apache raids and the other dangers that could befall a cattle drive in the territories. Brock and his companions returned to the Copper Canyon 4 days after Gabe's departure, their manner more threatening than before. Without Gabe's protective presence, Norah found herself constantly on edge, avoiding their table when possible and suffering their lewd comments when it wasn't. "Your watchdog's gone, ain't he?" Brock leered one evening, grabbing her arm as she served drinks to a neighboring table. "No one to protect you now, missy." "Let go of me," Norah said firmly, trying to pull away. His fingers dug deeper. "Or what? You gonna scream?" "Mosley don't care what happens to his girls as long as the drinks keep flowing." As if to prove him wrong, Frank Mosley's voice cut through the saloon noise. "Miller, hands off my waitress or take your business elsewhere." Brock released her with a snarl. "Just being friendly, Mosley." "Be friendly somewhere else," the owner growled, his hand moving meaningfully toward the shotgun he kept under the bar. "Miss Hayes has work to do." Norah shot Mosley a grateful glance as she hurried away from Brock's table. The saloon owner was far from perfect, but he understood that allowing customers to harass his staff was bad for business in the long run. That night, and each night after, Mosley himself walked Norah to the boarding house after her shift. He made it clear the arrangement was temporary, only until "that cowboy of yours gets back." But Norah appreciated the protection nonetheless. 13 days after Gabe's departure, not that she was counting, word reached Fort Bowie that the Henderson outfit had successfully delivered their cattle to Fort Apache and would return the following day. Norah tried to contain her anticipation, telling herself that Gabe might have changed his mind about seeing her again, that the connection she'd felt might have been one-sided or fleeting. Mrs. Miller, observant as ever, noticed Norah's restlessness that evening. "Henderson's boys coming back tomorrow, I hear," she commented casually as they sat in the parlor after dinner. "So they say," Norah replied, focusing intently on the shirt she was mending. "Including that nice Mr. Harrington, I imagine." Norah's needle stilled. "I wouldn't know his specific plans, Mrs. Miller." The older woman chuckled. "Of course not, dear, though I'd wager you'll find out soon enough. The following day was Nora's day off from the saloon. She spent it alternating between practical tasks: laundry, mending, organizing her small collection of belongings, and repeatedly finding herself at the window that overlooked the main street, watching for any sign of returning cowboys. By mid-afternoon, she'd grown frustrated with her own behavior and decided to visit the mercantile to replenish her dwindling supply of soap. The errand would at least give her something useful to do besides waiting like a lovesick girl, which she absolutely was not, she assured herself firmly. The mercantile was busy with afternoon shoppers when she arrived. Norah browsed the shelves, taking her time, half listening to the town gossip flowing around her. "Henderson's boys are back," she overheard Mrs. Perkins telling another woman near the fabric counter. "Saw them riding in about an hour ago. Looked trail weary but intact." Nora's heart quickened, but she forced herself to continue examining a display of hairpins with apparent interest. "Any trouble?" the other woman asked. "Some, from what my Henry heard. Apache war party hit them 2 days out from the reservation. Killed 1 man, wounded 2 others." Nora's blood ran cold. She abandoned all pretense of shopping and moved closer to the gossiping women. "Excuse me," she interrupted, trying to keep her voice steady. "Did you happen to hear who was hurt?" Mrs. Perkins looked at her with shrewd eyes. Concerned about someone in particular, Miss Hayes, Norah refused to be baited. "Just curious, Mrs. Perkins. It's terrible news." The older woman sniffed, clearly disappointed by Nora's composure. "The dead man was one of the younger Hands Phillips, I believe. Don't know about the wounded." "Thank you," Norah said, turning away before her relief could show too plainly on her face. While she felt genuine sympathy for the dead cowboy and his comrades, the selfish knowledge that Gabe wasn't among the casualties made her light-headed with relief. She purchased her soap and left the store, walking with purposeful steps back toward the boarding house. If the Henderson outfit had returned, Gabe would seek her out when he was ready if he still wanted to. Until then, she would go about her normal routine and not give the town gossips anything more to speculate about. She was halfway to the boarding house when she spotted him. Gabe was walking toward her from the direction of the livery stable, his gait slightly stiff, as if he'd been too long in the saddle. He'd obviously just arrived. Trail dust still clung to his clothes, and his face showed the weariness of hard travel. But when he saw her, his expression transformed, exhaustion giving way to a smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Norah stopped in the middle of the street, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. She wanted to run to him, propriety be damned, but instead stood rooted to the spot as he approached. "Norah," he said simply when he reached her, removing his hat. "I was just coming to find you." "I heard you were back," she replied, suddenly shy in a way she hadn't been before. "There was talk of trouble on the trail." A shadow crossed his face. "We lost young Phillips, good kid, just 19. 2 others got hurt, but they'll mend." "I'm sorry," Norah said softly. Then, before she could stop herself, "I was worried." The admission hung between them, more revealing than she'd intended. Gabe's eyes softened. "Were you now?" "Perhaps a little," she conceded, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. He smiled again, and something in that smile made her breath catch. "I thought about you," he said quietly. "Every day." People were passing on the street around them, some pausing to stare curiously at the dust-covered cowboy, and the saloon girl conversing so intently in broad daylight. Norah became acutely aware that they were creating a spectacle. "You look tired," she said, changing the subject. "Have you eaten?" He shook his head. "Came to find you first thing, we just got in." "Mrs. Miller always makes too much food," Norah found herself saying. "If you'd care to join us for supper." "I'm hardly presentable," Gabe gestured to his trail-worn appearance. "I've seen worse," she assured him with a small smile. "But if you'd prefer to clean up first, we don't eat until 6. The invitation was forward, perhaps too forward for a young woman to extend to a man she barely knew, but Norah couldn't bring herself to care about such proprieties. Not when the relief of seeing him safe was still coursing through her. 6 it is, then, Gabe agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Thank you." As they parted ways, Gabe to the hotel where he kept a room, Norah to continue to the boarding house, she felt as though something fundamental had shifted between them. The 2 weeks of separation, rather than weakening their connection, seemed to have solidified it somehow. Mrs. Miller was delighted by the prospect of a dinner guest, though she tried to mask her enthusiasm with practical concerns about having enough food prepared. Norah saw through the pretense easily. "It's just supper, Mrs. Miller," she said as she helped the older woman in the kitchen. "There's no need to make a fuss." "Of course not, dear," Mrs. Miller agreed, while simultaneously adding extra potatoes to the pot and retrieving her best tablecloth from the drawer. "Just being hospitable." Precisely at 6, a knock sounded at the door. Norah smoothed her dress she'd changed into a green calico that brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes and went to answer it. Gabe stood on the porch, freshly bathed and shaved, wearing clean clothes and holding his hat in one hand. In the other, he carried a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Evening," he said, his eyes taking in her appearance with evident appreciation. "You look lovely." "Thank you. Please come in." Norah stepped back, suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't been during their late-night walks or even their Sunday stroll. This felt more intimate, somehow inviting him into her home, even if it was just a rented room in a boarding house. Mrs. Miller emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mr. Harrington, how nice to see you again. I hope you're hungry. I may have made enough for a small army." Gabe smiled warmly at the older woman. "Starving, madam. Trail food doesn't compare to home cooking." He extended the package toward her. "Just a small token of appreciation for your hospitality." Mrs. Miller's eyes widened in surprise as she unwrapped the gift, a tin of imported English tea, a luxury rarely seen in Fort Bowie. "My goodness, how thoughtful. You must join me for a cup after supper." Dinner was a surprisingly comfortable affair. Mrs. Miller kept the conversation flowing, asking Gabe about his journey without dwelling on the tragedy that had occurred. He answered her questions politely, occasionally glancing at Norah with a warmth that made her pulse quicken. As they ate Mrs. Miller's hearty beef stew and fresh baked bread, Gabe spoke more about his plans for the future. "The land I mentioned is about 20 miles northeast of here," he explained. "Good water rights, enough grazing for a modest herd to start." Previous owner was heading back east to care for his ailing mother, willing to sell at a fair price. "Sounds promising," Mrs. Miller commented, glancing meaningfully at Norah. "When do you plan to see it?" "Day after tomorrow," Gabe replied. "Settled accounts with Henderson this afternoon. I'm a free man now." There was something in the way he said "free man" that made Norah wonder if he was trying to convey more than just his employment status. His eyes met hers across the table, and the intensity in them confirmed her suspicion. After dinner, Mrs. Miller insisted on serving tea in the parlor, using her new tin from Gabe. As she bustled about preparing it, Gabe and Norah found themselves momentarily alone in the dining room. "I meant what I said," he told her quietly. "I thought about you every day while I was gone." Norah felt a flutter in her chest. "I thought about you too," she admitted. He took a step closer. "When I ride out to look at that land, would you consider coming with me? Just for the day," he added quickly. "We could bring a picnic. I'd like your opinion on the place." The invitation took her by surprise. "My opinion on your ranch land?" "Yes." His gaze was steady, serious. "Your opinion matters to me, Norah." Before she could respond, Mrs. Miller called from the parlor, "Tea's ready, dears." The moment broken. They joined the widow for tea, the conversation turning to more general topics. But throughout the evening, Norah found her thoughts returning to Gabe's invitation and what might lie behind it. When he finally took his leave around 9 o'clock, Mrs. Miller tactfully remained in the parlor, allowing them a moment of privacy at the door. "About the day after tomorrow," Norah said hesitantly. "I'd like to go with you, but if it's not proper, I understand," Gabe interrupted, disappointment evident in his voice despite his attempt to hide it. "It's not that," she assured him. "It's just I'm supposed to work. Mosley won't give me the day off without notice." Relief crossed his face. "I can speak to Frank. He owes me a favor or two." "You know Mr. Mosley well?" Norah asked, surprised. "We served together," Gabe explained. "Before he bought the saloon. He's not as hard as he pretends to be." Norah raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "I'll believe that when I see it." "Trust me," Gabe said, his voice softening. "I'll take care of it." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else you should know. Brock and his boys left town yesterday, heading to Tucson from what I heard." The relief Norah felt was immediate and profound. "Good riddance," she said fervently. "My thoughts exactly." Gabe's expression turned serious. "Norah, he stopped, seeming to struggle for words. "These past 2 weeks being away, it made me realize." He trailed off again, and Norah found herself holding her breath, waiting for him to continue. But after a moment, he simply shook his head. "I should go. Let you get some rest." He placed his hat back on his head. "I'll speak to Mosley tomorrow, and if all goes well, I'll come for you at 8 on Wednesday morning. We can be at the property by midday, back before dark." "I'll be ready," Norah promised. After he left, she closed the door and leaned against it, her heart racing with anticipation and a nervous energy she couldn't quite identify. When she returned to the parlor, Mrs. Miller was waiting, her expression carefully neutral. "Nice young man," the widow observed mildly. "Respectful. Thoughtful." "Yes," Norah agreed, unable to hide her smile. "He is." Mrs. Miller's eyes twinkled. "And quite taken with you if I'm any judge of these matters." Norah felt her cheeks warm. "Mrs. Miller, really? Oh, don't mind me, dear." Just an old woman remembering what it was like to be young and in love. She gathered her knitting. "I think I'll turn in. Don't stay up too late dreaming." Alone in the parlor, Norah found herself doing exactly what Mrs. Miller had teased about dreaming, imagining possibilities she'd long since convinced herself were out of reach. A life beyond the saloon. A home. A partnership with a man who looked at her the way Gabe had tonight. It was too soon for such thoughts, she reminded herself sternly. They barely knew each other. And yet, there was something between them, something that felt solid and real in a way she'd never experienced before. Wednesday couldn't come soon enough. True to his word, Gabe appeared at 8 o'clock sharp on Wednesday morning, driving a rented wagon rather than riding horseback. He'd secured not only Norah's day off from the saloon, but also Mrs. Miller's blessing for the outing, though the older woman had extracted a promise that they would return well before dark. "You look beautiful," Gabe said as he helped Norah up onto the wagon seat. She smoothed the skirt of her blue calico, the same dress she'd worn to church, and adjusted her bonnet. "Thank you. I wasn't sure what would be appropriate for ranch inspection." He smiled as he climbed up beside her. "You could wear sackcloth and still be the prettiest woman in the territory." The compliment, delivered matter-of-factly rather than with flirtatious intent, brought color to Norah's cheeks. "I think the Arizona sun has addled your brain, Mr. Harrington." "Could be," he agreed amiably, flicking the reins to set the horses in motion. "Though I was thinking clearly enough to bring along a picnic basket. courtesy of the hotel restaurant. The day was perfect for travel, clear blue skies with just enough breeze to temper the heat. As the wagon rolled beyond the boundaries of Fort Bowie, Norah felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. She spent so much time within the confines of the town, between the boarding house and the saloon, that she'd almost forgotten how vast and beautiful the surrounding country could be. "I haven't been this far from town since Pa died," she admitted as they followed a winding trail northeast through scrubby terrain that gradually gave way to more verdant landscape as they approached the foothills. Gabe glanced at her. "You miss it, being out in the open?" Norah considered the question. "I miss the freedom of it, I suppose. In town, everyone's watching, judging. Out here—" She gestured to the expansive landscape around them. "Out here it feels like you can breathe," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's part of why I want my own place." Spent too many years taking orders, living by other people's rules. As they traveled, Gabe pointed out landmarks, sharing stories of the area from his days patrolling with the cavalry. Norah found herself relaxing in his company, laughing at his dry observations and offering her own thoughts freely. The conversation flowed easily between them, punctuated by comfortable silences as they admired particularly beautiful vistas. By midday, they crested a gentle rise and Gabe pulled the wagon to a stop. "There it is," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "What do you think?" Below them stretched a modest valley, sheltered by rocky outcroppings on one side and rolling hills on the other. A creek wound through the center, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows. A small cabin stood near the water, its weathered wood suggesting it had stood there for many years. Beyond it lay open grassland, greener than most of the surrounding territory. "It's beautiful," Norah said truthfully. "So much greener than I expected. Underground springs feed the creek," Gabe explained. "Never runs dry, even in the worst drought years. Previous owner ran about 200 head of cattle here comfortably. Small operation, but sustainable." He guided the wagon down the slope toward the cabin. As they drew closer, Norah could see that the structure was solid if somewhat neglected, a simple one-room building with a covered porch across the front and a stone chimney at one end. "Home sweet home," Gabe said as he halted the wagon and set the brake. "At least it could be." There was something in his tone that made Norah look at him sharply. But his expression gave nothing away as he jumped down and came around to help her from the seat. The cabin's interior was Spartan but serviceable: a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed frame against one wall. Dust covered every surface, and a family of mice had clearly made themselves at home in one corner. "Needs work," Gabe acknowledged as they stood in the center of the single room. "Lots of work. But it has good bones," Norah observed, running her hand along the solid timber wall. "The roof seems sound, and that fireplace would keep it warm in winter." Gabe watched her as she moved around the space, a curious expression on his face. "You see the potential then, not just the problems, of course." She turned to him, puzzled by the intensity in his gaze. Anyone with vision could see what this could become with some effort. He nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. "Come on, let's eat. We can explore the rest of the property afterward." They spread their picnic on a blanket near the creek, in the shade of a sprawling cottonwood. The hotel had provided a feast: cold chicken, bread, cheese, apples, and even a bottle of surprisingly decent wine. "This is lovely," Norah said as they ate, watching the play of sunlight through the leaves above them. "Thank you for bringing me. Thank you for coming." Gabe leaned back against the tree trunk, his posture more relaxed than she'd ever seen it. "Your opinion matters to me, Norah. I wanted you to see this place because—" He hesitated. "Because," she prompted when he didn't continue, He met her eyes directly. Because I'm hoping it might matter to you too. What happens here, I mean. Norah's heart quickened at the implication in his words. Gabe, what are you saying? He sat forward, his expression earnest. I know it's too soon. We've only known each other a few weeks. But I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. She stared at him, unable to form words as he continued. That night we met when those men were following you, something happened to me. He shook his head slightly, as if still trying to understand it himself. I'd seen you before at the saloon, noticed you. But that night, stepping between you and danger, it felt like I'd found a purpose I didn't know I was looking for. You were being a gentleman, Norah said softly. Anyone would have. No, he interrupted gently. Not anyone. And it wasn't just about being a gentleman. It was about you specifically. Something in me recognized something in you, Norah. I can't explain it better than that. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. I felt it too, she admitted. That connection, I thought I was imagining it. Relief crossed his face. You weren't. He took a deep breath. I want to buy this land, build something here, a future. His eyes held her steadily, and I want to know if there's any chance that future might include you, someday. The directness of his question left no room for misunderstanding. He wasn't proposing marriage, not yet, but he was laying his intentions bare, asking if she shared his vision of possibility. Norah looked around at the peaceful valley, the sturdy cabin, the clear running creek. Then back to Gabe's face, open and hopeful in a way she'd never seen before. Yes, she said simply. There's a chance. A good one, I think. The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, gradual, then all at once brilliant. He reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. That's all I needed to hear, he said. For now. They spent the remainder of the afternoon exploring the property, the spring that fed the creek, the sheltered meadows where cattle could graze, the rocky outcroppings that provided natural boundaries. Throughout it all, Norah found herself seeing the land not just as Gabe's potential ranch, but as a possible home, their home. It was a dangerous path for her thoughts to take, she knew. They were still virtually strangers in many ways. And yet, the connection between them felt more real, more substantial than any she'd experienced before. As the sun began its westward descent, Gabe reluctantly suggested they start back toward town. I promised Mrs. Miller we'd return before dark, he reminded her. And I don't intend to risk her wrath. I think she's warming up to me. Norah laughed. Mrs. Miller adored you from the moment you gave her that tin of tea. She's probably already planning our wedding breakfast. The words slipped out before she could consider them, and she felt her face flame with embarrassment. I didn't mean that. Gabe's gentle laugh interrupted her stammering. I hope she doesn't mind waiting a bit. I'd like to court you properly first, Norah Hayes, if you'll allow it. The formal request, delivered with such sincerity, melted her embarrassment. I'd like that, she said softly. The journey back to Fort Bowie passed quickly, filled with comfortable conversation and shared dreams. Gabe spoke of his plans for the ranch, the improvements he would make to the cabin first, then gradually building the cattle herd, perhaps adding horses eventually. Norah shared her own aspirations for a dress shop, describing the different services she could offer and how she hoped to save enough for a sewing machine within the year. Why wait? Gabe asked. For the sewing machine, I mean. If that's what's standing between you and starting your business, it seems a small obstacle. Norah shook her head. They're expensive. At least 3 months' wages from the saloon if I'm frugal with everything else. I could help, he offered tentatively. Not charity, he added quickly when he saw her expression. An investment maybe, or a loan if you prefer. Thank you, but no, Norah said firmly. I need to do this myself, prove that I can. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. I understand independence matters. It does. She softened her refusal with a smile. But I appreciate the offer. When they reached the boarding house, the sun was just beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Gabe helped Norah down from the wagon, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Thank you for today, he said, his voice low. For coming with me, for your honesty, for everything. Norah looked up at him, struck again by the warmth in his eyes whenever they rested on her. When will you decide? About the land. Already have, he replied. Going to speak to the bank tomorrow, settle the paperwork. Previous owners eager to get back east, we should be able to complete the sale within the week. So soon? She couldn't help asking. Gabe nodded. No sense waiting. I've saved for this for years. And now? His gaze held hers. Now I have even more reason to build something worthwhile. The implication in his words sent a flutter through Norah's chest. Will I see you before you move out there? Count on it, he promised. I'll need supplies, preparations. Figure it'll be a few weeks before I can live at the property full time. And even then, I plan to ride into town regularly. His smile turned slightly mischievous. Got a girl here I'm hoping to court after all. The old-fashioned phrase made Norah smile. Is that so, mm? His eyes dropped briefly to her lips, then back to her eyes. May I call on you tomorrow evening, after your shift? I'd like that. For a moment, they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then, with a gentle movement that gave her plenty of time to pull away if she wished, Gabe leaned down and pressed a soft kiss to her cheek. Until tomorrow, Norah Hayes, he murmured. She watched him drive away, her hand unconsciously rising to touch the spot where his lips had brushed her skin. Only when the wagon had disappeared from sight did she turn and enter the boarding house, where Mrs. Miller was predictably waiting in the parlor, trying and failing to appear casual about it. Have a nice day, dear, the widow asked innocently. Norah couldn't suppress her smile. Yes, Mrs. Miller. A very nice day indeed. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to his word, Gabe completed the purchase of the ranch property within days. He named it Cottonwood Creek Ranch, after the trees lining the waterway that made the land so valuable. While he began the work of preparing the cabin and land for full-time habitation, Norah continued her shifts at the Copper Canyon. But now, every evening after work, Gabe would be waiting to walk her home. Their walks grew longer, their conversations deeper, as they discovered more about each other's pasts, hopes, and dreams. Norah learned that beneath Gabe's calm exterior lay a complex man, thoughtful and intelligent, with a dry humor that emerged more freely as they grew comfortable together. He spoke of his parents with quiet reverence, of his time in the cavalry with honesty about both the camaraderie and the horrors. And he listened when she shared her own stories about her mother's early death, her father's dreams that had led them west, her determination to make her own way despite the setbacks. Once a week, usually on Norah's day off, Gabe would bring the wagon to take her out to Cottonwood Creek. She watched with admiration as the property slowly transformed under his capable hands. The cabin was cleared of dust and vermin, its cracks sealed, its sparse furnishings augmented with pieces Gabe crafted himself from local timber. "You're good at this," she observed one day as he put the finishing touches on a rocking chair for the porch. "Where did you learn woodworking?" "My father," Gabe replied, running a hand over the smooth arm of the chair. He was a farmer, but in winter, when the fields were dormant, he made furniture. Taught me what he knew. He glanced up at her with a smile. Said a man should know how to build the things his family needs. The casual reference to family sent a warm flutter through Norah's chest. More and more, these moments of domestic partnership felt natural between them. Gabe working on the cabin while Norah hung curtains she'd sewn from fabric he'd purchased in town, sharing meals at the rough-hewn table, discussing which areas of the property would be developed first. It was during one such visit, nearly a month after their first trip to the ranch, that Gabe broached a subject they'd both been carefully avoiding. They were sitting on the newly completed porch as evening approached, watching the sunset paint the valley in golden light. Norah had her sewing in her lap curtains for the single window at the back of the cabin while Gabe whittled a piece of wood beside her. "Been thinking," he said, his tone carefully casual. "Cabin's nearly ready now. Planning to move out here full-time next week." Norah nodded, trying to ignore the pang of disappointment at the thought of seeing him less frequently. "It looks wonderful. You've accomplished so much in a short time. Thanks to your help." He set aside his whittling. "Norah, there's something I want to ask you, something important." The seriousness in his tone made her set down her sewing and turn to face him fully. "What is it?" Gabe took a deep breath. "These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time together, they've been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she admitted softly. His eyes held hers intently. "I don't want that to end when I move out here. I don't want to see you just once a week or when I ride into town for supplies." Norah's heart began to race. "What are you saying, Gabe?" "I'm saying I love you, Norah Hayes." The words fell between them, simple and profound. "I've known it since that night outside the saloon, if I'm being honest with myself, and I'm asking if you'll marry me, be my wife, build this life with me." Though she'd begun to anticipate this moment, the reality of it still took her breath away. "Gabe, you don't have to answer right now," he said quickly. "I know it's sudden. We've only known each other a short time, but I'm certain of my feelings, and I hope you might feel the same way." "I do," Norah said, her voice stronger than she expected. "I love you too, Gabriel Harrington. And yes, I'll marry you." The joy that spread across his face was like nothing she'd ever seen before, pure, unguarded happiness that transformed his features and lit his eyes from within. He moved from his chair to kneel before her, taking her hands in his. "I don't have a ring yet," he said. "Been saving for one, but wanted to ask you first, make sure." Norah silenced him by leaning forward and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, then deepened as Gabe's arms encircled her, drawing her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "I don't need a ring," she whispered. "Just you." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Fort Bowie. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by Mrs. Miller, who cried unabashedly throughout, Frank Mosley, who pretended gruffness but had closed the saloon for the occasion, and a handful of other townsfolk who had come to know and respect the couple. Norah wore a dress she'd sewn herself, ivory cotton with delicate lace trim, she'd splurged on from the mercantile. Gabe, looking handsome and slightly uncomfortable in a new suit, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle on Frank Mosley's arm, the saloon owner having volunteered to give her away in the absence of her father. "Take care of her, Harrington," Mosley muttered as he placed Norah's hand in Gabe's. "She's too good for the likes of either of us." "Don't I know it?" Gabe replied with a smile that was meant only for his bride. The minister's words were traditional, but seemed to carry special weight in the small, sun-filled church. When Gabe slipped a simple gold band onto Norah's finger purchased with the proceeds from his first small cattle sale, his hands were steady, his eyes full of promise. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Their first kiss as husband and wife was brief but tender, mindful of their audience yet heartfelt in its affirmation of the commitment they'd just made. The celebration afterward was held at the boarding house, where Mrs. Miller had prepared a feast that could have fed half the town. Frank Mosley contributed several bottles of his finest whiskey, and someone produced a fiddle, leading to impromptu dancing in the parlor. As evening fell and the guests began to depart, Gabe leaned close to Norah, his voice low in her ear. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Harrington?" The new name sent a thrill through her. "Home," she repeated, savoring the word. "Yes, I believe I am." They said their goodbyes, enduring good-natured teasing from the remaining guests. Mrs. Miller embraced Norah tightly, whispering, "I'm so happy for you, dear. He's a good man." "I know," Norah whispered back. "Thank you for everything." The wagon ride to Cottonwood Creek was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts as darkness settled over the landscape. Gabe's hand found Norah's on the seat between them, his fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture that felt both protective and seeking reassurance. When they arrived at the ranch, their home now, Gabe helped Norah down from the wagon, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "What are you doing?" she laughed as he carried her toward the cabin. "Carrying my wife over the threshold," he replied with mock solemnity. "It's tradition." Inside, the cabin was transformed from when Norah had last seen it. Fresh flowers stood in a jar on the table, which was covered with a new cloth. Lanterns cast a warm, golden glow over the room, and the bed, now wider and more substantial, was made up with new linens. "When did you do all this?" Norah asked as Gabe set her gently on her feet. "Yesterday," he admitted. "Wanted it to be special for you, for us." Emotion welled in her throat at his thoughtfulness. "It's perfect." What followed was a night of gentle discovery, of whispered words and tender touches as they learned each other as husband and wife. Gabe was patient and attentive, ensuring Norah's comfort and pleasure before his own, and she found herself falling even more deeply in love with this man, who continued to surprise her with his depth of feeling and consideration. In the quiet darkness afterward, lying in the circle of Gabe's arms, Norah felt a sense of peace and belonging she'd thought lost forever after her father's death. "Happy," Gabe murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied truthfully. "Are you?" His arms tightened around her. "Never been happier in my life." The days that followed established the rhythms of their life together at Cottonwood Creek. Gabe worked from dawn to dusk, building the ranch bit by bit, constructing corrals, mending fences, purchasing cattle a few head at a time as their finances allowed. Norah threw herself into creating a true home, making the cabin comfortable and welcoming while also beginning to take in sewing work from town. Word had spread that Mrs. Harrington of Cottonwood Creek had a deft hand with a needle, and soon women from Fort Bowie and even the military post were bringing her garments to mend or alter. The income, modest though it was, contributed to their growing enterprise and gave Norah a sense of partnership in building their future. 3 months after the wedding, on a trip into town for supplies, they encountered Frank Mosley outside the general store. "Harringtons," he greeted them with a nod. "How's ranch life treating you?" "Can't complain," Gabe replied, shaking the saloon owner's hand. "Busy time of year, but we're making progress." Mosley's eyes shifted to Norah. "You're looking well, Mrs. Harrington. Country air agrees with you, it seems." Norah smiled, aware that she had indeed bloomed in her new life, away from the smoke and noise of the saloon. "It does, Mr. Mosley, though I do miss some of the people in town." The older man harumphed, but she could see he was pleased by the sentiment. "Speaking of town matters," he said, turning back to Gabe. "That building next to the Mercantile, the one that used to be Howard's barber shop before he moved, it's for rent. Reasonable terms, too, from what I hear." Norah felt Gabe glance at her, a question in his eyes. They discussed her dream of a dress shop many times, planning for it as a future possibility when the ranch was more established. "Might be worth looking into," Gabe said carefully, "though we've got our hands full with the ranch right now." "Just thought you'd want to know," Mosley shrugged. "Place like that won't stay available long." He tipped his hat to them both. "Good seeing you, don't be strangers." As he walked away, Norah turned to Gabe. "He did that on purpose, didn't he, Frank?" "Oh, definitely." Gabe's lips twitched with amusement. "Subtle as a bull in a china shop, that man." "Do you think we should look at the space?" Norah asked hesitantly. "Just to see." Gabe studied her face. "Is that what you want to start your shop now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "The timing doesn't seem right with the ranch still getting established. But it's an opportunity," he finished for her. "And you've been working toward this for years." She nodded, conflicted. "It feels selfish, though, to pursue my dream when we're both needed at Cottonwood Creek." Gabe took her hands in his. "Listen to me, Norah Hayes. Your dreams aren't selfish. They're part of who you are, part of why I fell in love with you." His gaze was steady, earnest. "If you want to look at that space, we'll look. If you want to open your shop, we'll figure out how to make it work alongside the ranch." Tears pricked at Norah's eyes. "I don't deserve you." "Other way around, I'm pretty sure," he replied with a soft smile. "Come on, let's go see this place before someone else snatches it up." The former barber shop was small but well situated, with a large front window for displaying goods and enough space for a counter, sewing area, and fitting room. The rent was indeed reasonable, especially since the building's owner, a widow herself, was eager to have a respectable business occupy the space. As they walked through it, Norah could see it clearly in her mind's eye: curtains in the window, a comfortable chair for clients, her sewing machine, which Gabe had surprised her with as a wedding present, set up in good light. A proper shop where she could create rather than just mend and alter. "You're already decorating it in your head, aren't you?" Gabe observed, watching her expression. She laughed, caught out. "Is it that obvious? Only to someone who loves you." He leaned against the counter, considering. "It could work, you know. You could come into town a few days each week, stay with Mrs. Miller if needed. I can manage the ranch those days." Norah shook her head. "I don't want to be away from you or from our home." "Then we find another solution," Gabe said simply. "Maybe you open just 2 or 3 days a week at first." "We could make it work, Norah, if it's what you want." The conviction in his voice, his unwavering support of her ambitions, filled her with love and gratitude. "Let me think about it," she said. "It's a big decision," he nodded, respecting her need to consider carefully. "Of course. No rush." That evening, as they drove back to Cottonwood Creek, Norah found herself torn between excitement at the possibility of realizing her dream sooner than expected and concern about dividing her attention between the shop and the ranch, between her ambitions and their shared goals. As if sensing her thoughts, Gabe said quietly, "You know, a business in town could be good for the ranch too. Brings in steady income, gives us connections with more potential customers." "That's true," Norah acknowledged, "and I could still help at the ranch on the days I'm not at the shop." "Exactly," he glanced at her. "I want you to be happy, Norah, and I know that means having work that fulfills you, not just being my wife." She reached for his hand. "Being your wife fulfills me too, you know, more than I ever thought possible." His fingers tightened around hers. "Good to hear," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "because I plan on you being my wife for a very long time." 2 weeks later, a weathered but cheerful sign hung in the window of the former barber shop: Hayes Dressmaking and Alterations. Inside, Norah Hayes arranged fabric samples and pattern books, her sewing machine prominently displayed on a table near the window. They had decided to start small. The shop would be open 3 days a week initially, with Norah staying at Cottonwood Creek the remaining time. If business grew, they would reassess the arrangement. For now, it seemed a workable compromise that allowed Norah to pursue her dream while still being an active partner in building their ranch. The bell above the door jingled, and Norah looked up to see Mrs. Miller enter, beaming with approval. "Oh, my dear, it looks wonderful," the older woman exclaimed, turning slowly to take in the transformed space. "So professional. Your father would be so proud." Norah felt a pang at the mention of her father, wishing he could have lived to see this day. "Thank you, Mrs. Miller, I hope so." "I know so," the widow assured her, "and I've come with your first official commission." She produced a bolt of fine blue cotton from her basket. "New Sunday dress. I trust you completely with the design." "I'd be honored," Norah said, genuinely touched by the gesture. Throughout the morning, a steady stream of visitors came to admire the new shop and place orders, or inquire about services. Word had spread quickly through Fort Bowie's female population, and by midday, Norah had bookings for 2 new dresses and several alterations, more than enough work to justify the shop's existence. When Gabe arrived shortly after noon, bringing a picnic lunch for them to share, he found his wife flushed with excitement and surrounded by fabric swatches and order notes. "Successful morning?" he asked, setting the basket on the counter. "Beyond my expectations," Norah admitted. "I think this might actually work, Gabe." "Of course it will work," he said confidently. "You're talented and everyone in town knows it." He pulled her into a quick embrace. "I'm proud of you, Mrs. Harrington." She leaned into him, drawing strength and reassurance from his solid presence. "Thank you for believing in me, for making this possible." "You made it possible," he corrected gently. "I just helped clear the path a little." As they shared their simple lunch in the back room of the shop, Norah marveled at how far her life had come in just a few short months. From the fear and uncertainty of that night outside the saloon to this moment of contentment and possibility, all because a quiet cowboy had stepped between her and danger and said, "Not tonight." "Penny for your thoughts," Gabe said, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking about how we met," she replied. "How different my life might be if you hadn't been there that night." His expression sobered. "I've thought about that too, more than I care to admit." "Do you believe in fate?" Norah asked suddenly. "That some things are meant to be?" Gabe considered the question seriously. "I don't know about fate exactly, but I do believe there are moments that change the course of a life, choices that matter more than others." His eyes met hers. "Stepping between you and those men that night, best choice I ever made." Norah reached across the small table to take his hand. "For me too." The years that followed brought both challenges and joys to the Harringtons of Cottonwood Creek. The ranch grew steadily under Gabe's careful management, eventually supporting a respectable herd of cattle and several fine horses. Norah's dress shop flourished, expanding to 5 days a week with the help of an apprentice, a young woman from the fort who showed exceptional skill with a needle. Their greatest joy came 18 months after their wedding, with the birth of their son, Thomas James Harrington. The baby arrived during a spring thunderstorm, with Mrs. Miller serving as midwife and Gabe pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door until his son's lusty cries announced his arrival. "He's perfect," Gabe whispered when Norah finally placed the swaddled infant in his arms. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and your eyes, I think." "Your stubborn chin," Norah countered with a tired smile. "Poor child." Gabe laughed softly, gazing down at his son with wonder. "He'll need stubbornness. Life out here isn't always easy." "No," Norah agreed, "but it's good, isn't it?" "Our life together." His eyes met hers, full of the same steady love she'd come to depend on. "The best life I could imagine." 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Elizabeth Ann, who arrived with considerably less drama than her brother but twice his determination, it seemed. From her earliest days, Eliza, as they called her, showed a strong will and curious nature that kept her parents constantly on their toes. "She's just like you," Gabe would often say fondly as their daughter explored the ranch with fearless enthusiasm. "Me," Norah would counter. "That stubborn streak is all Harrington." As the children grew, so did the ranch and Norah's business. They added rooms to the cabin, eventually transforming it into a proper house with a separate bedroom for the children and a larger kitchen where family meals became the heart of their days. They weathered the hardships that came with frontier life: drought years when the creek ran low, a fire that destroyed one of the barns and had to be rebuilt, illnesses that swept through the territory, touching their family but, thankfully, sparing them the worst outcomes that befell some of their neighbors. Through it all, the foundation they'd built on that first meeting, on one man's decision to stand between danger and a woman he didn't yet know, remained solid and true. 10 years after that fateful night outside the Copper Canyon Saloon, Norah stood on the porch of their home, watching as Gabe taught 7-year-old Thomas to ride his own pony while 5-year-old Eliza looked on impatiently, awaiting her turn. The ranch had prospered, now employing several hands and providing a comfortable living for their family. Her dress shop, now managed primarily by her former apprentice with Norah overseeing the business aspects, continued to thrive in town. Frank Mosley had sold the Copper Canyon years ago, using the proceeds to open a more respectable hotel in the growing town. Mrs. Miller had passed peacefully in her sleep 2 winters ago, leaving the boarding house to her son, who had returned from San Francisco to manage it. Fort Bowie itself had evolved from the rough frontier settlement it had once been into a more established town, still small but increasingly civilized as families put down roots and businesses flourished. "Mama, look at me," Thomas called as he guided his pony in a careful circle under Gabe's watchful eye. "I'm doing it by myself. I see you, darling," Norah called back, smiling at her son's pride. "Wonderful job. My turn next," Eliza insisted, bouncing on her toes beside her father. "Papa, you promised." "Patience, little miss," Gabe admonished gently. "Your brother's earned his time." As she watched her family, Norah felt a swell of gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. This life they'd built together, this home, these children, this love had begun with a moment of courage and kindness on a dark street in Fort Bowie. Later that evening, after the children were asleep in their beds, Norah and Gabe sat together on the porch, a habit they'd maintained through all the years of their marriage. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast Arizona sky like diamonds on velvet. "What are you thinking about?" Gabe asked, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "You've been quiet tonight." Norah squeezed his fingers. "I was remembering that night we met, those men following me from the saloon and you stepping between us." "Ah." He was silent for a moment. "That was a long time ago." 10 years today, actually." She turned to look at him, finding his familiar features softened by the starlight. "Did you know that?" Surprise crossed his face. "No, I didn't realize. 10 years." He shook his head slightly. "Feels like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. Do you ever regret it?" Norah asked. Getting involved that night, taking on a saloon girl with nothing to her name but dreams. Gabe's expression grew serious. "Not for a single moment." He raised their joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Best decision I ever made, stepping between you and trouble that night. Everything good in my life came from that moment." Norah leaned against his shoulder, content in the certainty of their shared love. "Mine too." They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. After a while, Gabe spoke again, his voice thoughtful. "You know, I've often wondered what would have happened if I hadn't been there that night, if someone else had intervened, or if you'd made it home safely on your own. I've wondered that too, Norah admitted. But I'm grateful things happened exactly as they did. She smiled up at him. Even if those men gave me quite a fright at the time. Gabe's arm tightened around her shoulders. They were the worst kind of cowards, preying on a woman alone, but in a strange way I owe them a debt. Without their bad intentions, I might never have found the courage to speak to you. You'd have found another way, Norah said confidently. I believe we were meant to find each other one way or another. He smiled at that. My wife, the romantic. You love it, she teased. I love you, he corrected softly. The simple words, spoken countless times over their years together, still held the power to warm Norah's heart. And I love you, Gabriel Harrington, today and always. As they sat together in the quiet darkness, surrounded by the home they'd built and the life they'd created, Norah thought about the long, winding path that had led them here. From a frightened young woman being followed from a saloon to a confident wife, mother, and businesswoman. From a solitary cowboy with nothing but dreams of land to a respected rancher with a thriving enterprise and a family to cherish. All because of 3 simple words spoken on a darkened street. Not tonight. Words that had changed everything, opening the door to a lifetime of love, partnership, and happiness neither of them had dared to imagine possible. Words that had begun their story, a story still being written with each passing day at Cottonwood Creek Ranch, under the vast Arizona sky.